welcome everybody to a Chatham House webinar on the effects of a Russian brain drain, slightly more provocatively titled, Will Russia's Brain Drain Weaken the Regime? I'll say something about that in just a second, but more importantly, so will four outstanding Russian speakers today. So, I mean, obviously, by way of context, thousands have fled Russia. This is well known. Their motives are perhaps slightly less clear and appear to be varied in my personal view. And my colleague Yekaterina Sachkova, in the top left of my screen anyway, has spent a good deal of her fellowship with us at Chatham House, examining what these new Russian exiles have been doing since they left Russia. But she's also spent a great deal of time thinking about the effects of this exodus on Russia itself, and to a certain extent on the West. Now, I understand that some people might not worry about this too much. And to an extent, I do sympathize with that view. We should all be more concerned with the fate and future of Ukraine in so many ways. And yet I do find myself concerned and perhaps a little scared, and perhaps at the same time, somewhat optimistic as well about the effects of this exodus. But what it means if some of the most brightest and best people have left Russia. I have real trouble imagining, which is why these expert speakers are here and not me. But I have real trouble imagining what happens to a country when its talent leaves, when you hollow it out, when it's excavated, if you like a critical minerals mine. I'm sorry. And it does strike me as important because it will have direct implications on the West as well. What the brain drain makes Russia is conceivably important to us too. Would a less educated, I put that out there as a possibility, but because Russia has always been pretty educated, but would a less educated Russia become more nationalist, more resentful? What would its wants and needs be? Or, and this is the optimistic part, for me anyway, would it hasten the which presumably is something that we might all want, and does that constitute a positive outcome from a brain drain? I really don't know. These are just things that I thought about on the train coming to the office this morning. But I do have trouble grappling with it because the topic is so very big. And we're not claiming to cover the whole topic today, the whole waterfront. There's enormous number of things you could say, or a number of angles you could take. We're going to take sort of 3 or 4. And that leads me into introducing the speakers. So first, I've already mentioned Yekaterina Sachkova will give an overview of the so-called Russian brain drain and its implications and effects, particularly on Russia. But as I say, we'll say a little bit about the West as well. Then we'll move to Vladimir Kozlov. He is a demographer and an associate professor at the Graduate School of Public Policy at Nazarbayev University, to obviously talk about the demographic implications, what that means when so many leave, and presumably, although some have come back, of course, but when so many don't come back, and the types of people as well. Then we'll move to Alexander Kolyandr, well known to those of you who come to the Chatham House Kruzhok, but is an economist at the Senior Fellow with the Democratic Resilience Programme at the Centre for European Policy Analysis, CEPA, and I believe he also does some work for The Bell, which I will talk about in just a second, because our final speaker, last but not least, is Elizaveta Osyetnitskaya, returning to us, in fact, journalist, media manager, and she is the founder of The Bell Media and the YouTube channel This is Osyetnitskaya. And I highly do, I believe it's moving to a subscription model, in fact, and one of my colleagues or one of the speakers will put the link to The Bell, the insider analysis of Russian business and politics, in the chat right now. So Elizaveta will speak to us about the implications for Russian business, maybe something on politics, maybe something on tech, a little bit on IT, maybe greening issues as well. So it's a sort of slightly more commercial element to it all. So that is that. Speakers will speak for approximately 7 minutes each. So we will have well over an hour, if they are disciplined, well over an hour for questions and discussion. Okay, with that, I must say that this is really all the design of Yekaterina Sachkova, her baby, her project, her life for the last year. So it is only right that she goes first. Over to you, Yekaterina. Thank you very much for doing this.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, James, and thank you to Chatham House for opening the expert space for this conversation. James has already mentioned that such a topic related to Russians in exile, Russian brain drain, nowadays rarely finds itself at the center of political or expert agendas. And yet, I believe, and I hope you would agree with me, in an hour and a half, it touches on core questions on security and long-term strategy towards Russia. And since I'm the first speaker, let me address the elephant in the room, the security. And I presume it might release some pressure for further speakers, because we are having this conversation on a Chatham House web internet base, and it's worth mentioning that there is justified concern in Western societies about the security risks related to Russians who left before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and that's presumably one of the main reason to limit some conversation towards this community and regarding policy dimension of interaction with this community. And I find it important to highlight that this conversation is not about advocacy for this community. It's more about data and research about it, even though as for me, I find it's very important to start the conversation about advocacy for this community, but maybe on some another occasion and with another event framework. As for my Chatham House Fellowship, I explore policy dimension of engaging with Russians in exile for Western country, the brain drain agenda. And I find this community in a strange limbo, if you wish, between rejection at home, symbolical and factual, and uncertainty abroad. And that's why this conversation, from my point of view, might have two sides. This story might have two sides. First, international, and the conversation about the potential contribution of exiles to their new host countries, positive and negative. And second side of the story, second side of this same coin, is domestic. So what actually Russia lost with this wave of immigration, and is this loss significant? And I presume our experts will tell us more from the expert professional point of view. As for me, I would like to give the brief highlights on that community. So who are the people we're talking about? To begin with, since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, according to various estimates, between 650,000 and 1 million people have left Russia. And that's a pretty broad analysis of all of this data. And it's important to highlight for those who may be not so familiar with this topic that we don't have official and reliable data on this. Not from Russian side, and we understand why. And it's pretty hard to get these fragments of this mosaic information from different countries from all over the world, because the geography of this immigration is broad, not only post-Soviet countries, but Europe, Latin America, North America, and so on. So I would say that the data would be the first challenge for researchers to get to the point with that community. And second challenge would be like the situation which remains fluid, because people are moving, people are getting back to Russia, and people are getting back to another countries, searching for a better life, more career opportunities, and some other professional challenges as well. And actually, if someone is more interested in profiling that community, there are several projects led by Russian experts in last 3 years, such as Outrush, ReRussia, analytical projects run by the Bell Media we've mentioned previously. So several of them are available online, and I encourage people to read it and to understand the complexity of this issue, because in a situation with no relevant data, the value of expert comments and expertise from, I presume, Russians in particular, is very, very important. So we are talking primarily about people in their 20s to 40s. As for their professions, we might highlight IT specialists, entrepreneurs, academics, journalists, and those who are working in the creative industries. That's very broad estimate. We can say that this community consists of very highly educated people. They are mostly liberal-minded, and that wouldn't be much of an exaggeration to say that this exodus is politically driven and anti-war driven, even though, as I said, those data is based on interviews and not mostly on quantitative data. And I would say, from like my personal research experience, majority of these people had previously some experience of engaging with international, professional, or educational communities. So they identify themselves as a member of a global society from the very beginning, and that might be one of the reasons for them to move abroad. And as academics, as cultural professionals, as educators, that community is strongly dependent on political pressure at home, and they were one of the first to experience extra political pressure after the full-scale invasion in 2022. So, of course, it opens the conversation about how the academia and humanitarian, if you wish, and civic and humanitarian fields are in desperate need of skills and people in Russia nowadays. And the last thing I would like to highlight to contribute to our conversation is the trend of connectivity of these immigrants to their homeland, to their families, and to their professional communities of those who stayed. And that might be something different from the previous waves of Russian and Soviet immigrants. And for some of Russian immigrants, it's actually getting some kind of a tradition even to return occasionally back home to meet with family and friends. And also, and James mentioned that, and it's worth another conversation, some of that immigrants decide to come back to Russia after a year, 2, or even 3 of immigration abroad. And the reasons for that comeback might depend on political views, social and economic status of households of Russian immigrants. But I would say that the agenda of Russian propaganda helps for some of that immigrants to make such a, I would say, difficult decision because I would say the messaging from the officials are getting, more and more soft towards returnees. It's more like everybody makes mistakes, so just come back and we'll forget about what happened. But it's fair only for those who weren't engaged in political activities and who weren't publicly oppose the war and repressions and actually got some public political voice. For those who had, it's getting more and more worse towards new laws, criminal cases, and other type of social and political pressures. So for dissidents, there are no ways home, but for those who are like in the middle with the moderate position, it still might be a thing to come back and continue non-political professional life, I would put it that way. So my final message, Russians in exile is a dynamic and significant, but nowadays very fluid social and political power. And it's worth discussing their impact both internationally and domestically. And I'm very happy that we have such an experts with us today to look at this from different professional points of views.
Yekaterina, that is the perfect introduction. Thank you very much indeed. There is so many, I mean, you won't take this offensively as an offense, I'm sure, but there are a lot more questions than answers at the moment. Maybe we can provide some of those answers. I'm sure we won't be able to provide all of them, but that is exactly how to get into this difficult topic, which encompasses everything from ethics to security, as you sort of mentioned. Right, then, let's move to Vladimir, and maybe you could go into the demography of it just a little bit more for us. I mean, obviously, there's many aspects to this. There's the numbers of Russians killed, there's the numbers of Russians who have fled, and there's a sort of I think the difficulty that the Russian state is having in getting Russians to make babies as well, quite frankly. So it seems to me that Russia is facing, I mean, I say this as a layperson, but not a demographic. I mean, you can tell me if it's a demographic crisis or not, but it's certainly facing huge demographic difficulties, and some of the implications for that for Russia, as we say. Over to you, Vladimir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, what I should say from the demographic point of view is demography is quite a macro science, and we're looking at the long-term trends and so on. And I should say that, well, the demographic difficulties of Russia, especially in fertility, well, generally they're, not higher and not more important and more dramatical than the demographic problems of all developed countries. Yeah. Well, maybe there are some questions to mortality, but also in case of migration, I also cannot say that there are any really huge problems in this case. Well, there are several, and I will talk about them. But, well, generally, this so-called exodus, maybe it was called exodus not because of a high magnitude of the number of it and quite high numbers of the persons who migrated, because generally in comparison with the previous waves, I cannot say that it's something significant. So, but the problem is that it was just concentrated in quite a short period of time. But also if you compare it in some relative figures with the countries like Belarus, for example, or maybe Venezuela, or maybe Iran and so on, well, it's still generally not so important. Maybe it's not correct comparison with Venezuela and Iran, the growing country, but even if comparing with Belarus, well, generally in relative figures, the relative number of migrants to the whole Russian population and to the Russian labor force, it's not so significant. So generally, if we take a look at the number of persons employed in Russia, it's about 1%. Well, generally, I could say that very strange anti-migration policy led to, well, generally loses about 1 million of labor force because, well, generally by some preliminary analysis, if you take a look at the labor migrants in 2024, there are maybe 1 million of them less in comparison with the previous years. So generally comparable figures actually for the Russian labor market and so on. So in this case, I cannot say that it's something significant for the demographic point of view, from the demographic point of view. Yeah, of course, we can say that, well, generally, these are mainly young persons. And, well, when we took a look at their, for example, characteristics, we found that many of them maybe already postponed the childbearing. So many of them are childless. And they are childless at the age of 30, 35, and so on, which generally means that if they keep postponing the childbearing in migration, maybe it will result in quite a low fertility, but among these migrants, not among the Russian population. So this is a problem of them, not the problem of Russia or the regime or something like this. So yeah, so I should say that, well, from the demographic point of view, well, it's not so significant. Yeah, shocking because quite a short period of time. But yeah, there are some other demographic processes in Russia which generally are more dramatic, and there are some other, well, laws or, well, some policy adopted that generally influences the labor market even worse. But for some countries of a destination, this wave of migrants was quite significant. So, for example, if I take a look in Armenia, it was, well, maybe if I take a look at the employed population, it was up to 5% of the extra employed population to the labor market. For Georgia, it was quite significant. Now, for example, it's growing for Montenegro and for Serbia, more than 1%. And still, and well, I should say that it was more demographic shock on the countries of destination. And for example, it could be worse to talk about some small countries that used to have emigration. So the negative migration growth, the negative migration balance that suddenly received such a positive migration growth, like Georgia, Armenia, Montenegro, Serbia, Kyrgyzstan somehow, and so not such a big countries like Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan, but, well, these countries. And, well, this could be maybe more interesting to discuss. So if this exodus could genuinely influence somehow some other countries. But for the Russia, well, I should say that, of course, we can say that if we take a look at the quality of these specialists, it is quite significant. Yeah, Jane, it's quite significant loss of the capital because the majority of them are educated, the majority of them have quite a good profession, but we should not forget that it was quite a random process. So many specialists, they couldn't migrate because some of the countries just relocated the IT specialists. Many IT specialists were just locked in the country because they were worked for some banks and so on. And in these cases, they could not get an opportunity to go out. Yeah, like, for example, the IT specialists who worked for Sberbank and some other banks. Also, if we just talk about the IT specialists, I could argue that the persons who were automatically relocated had any political, liberal views on life. I suppose that they were just automatically relocated and now some of them are coming back and so on. The problem of if they find some new positions in Russia, if they come back, maybe yes, maybe no. And generally this is the most rigorous, and the most, generally floating part of them. if we're talking about the political activists and so on, yeah, they migrated and so on, but not all of them could receive visas. Some of them had to stay. If we're talking about the researchers, many of them could not get visas. The younger, yeah, they could go to some PhD positions. And in this case, if you take a look at the demography of the academics, yeah, many of them changed their affiliations. There are many papers about it. We can generally see the portrait, and mainly this is a young specialist, yeah, but not in all the industries. Somewhere it was impossible to come, somewhere there was because of the security. People could not either leave Russia, yeah, for example, some specialists in physics and so on, or for example, they could not be accepted by the countries of destination, also for some security reasons. Just don't issue the visas for some Russian physicists and specialists in engineering and so on and so on. So it's a very complex situation, and well, generally the portrait of the average persons who migrated was just formed by some random factors. So if the persons were lucky enough to get visa, if this country was opened, if the person was lucky enough to get some position, so depending on his or her social ties, if the persons maybe have no children or don't have children at school, or not too many children, something like this, or generally not other dependent family members. If the person had enough money, and especially in the currency, because you know the person is common, and generally all the banks transactions are blocked. So in this case, this is another problem. So in this case, I should say that everything was quite random. So we see that up to 800,000 of persons were randomly taken from the Russian economic system. Well, they're mainly young, mainly childless, with quite a good fortune, incomes, and very well educated. But in absolute figures, within the short period of time, it looks a bit shocking. But in relative figures and in comparison with the countries with a close situation, looking generally in details on the Russian labor market, I cannot say that it's something tragic. But, well, from the demographic point of view, it's interesting to take a look at the direction on the countries of destination. And I will stop here. I'm ready to answer all the questions. I hope I was enough provocative for the questions.
Well, you've been provocative by downplaying it, in fact, Vladimir. So I'm so it's absolutely interesting when you say that it is not massively demographically, statistically significant in the greater scheme of things. And in a sense, that surprises me. But you are the expert, and you will be interrogated for it. But but at the same time, that is a fascinating angle, and you have brought in several new angles there. I'm tempted to just keep on chatting with you, but I must not. Let's move on to Alexandra. Alexandra, again, I'm familiar with your very even-handed views on the. Are you there still? Yes, I think you're there. Yeah, your very even-handed views on the Russian economy from our Kruzhok sessions. But I know you don't think it's in a wonderful state of health. It's not a healthy economy. But I also know that you are not predicting its imminent collapse or anything like it. In fact, it is really quite resilient and has some things going for it. So could you take us into perhaps the effects? But obviously, this is a much more a narrow topic than you may be used to when speaking with Chatham House, Alexandra. And just if you could, following on from Vladimir's presentation, really, and hopefully using Vladimir's presentation, tell us about the effects of that. Okay, maybe it's not demographically significant. The effects of the exodus, the effects of the brain drain, the effects of all of those talented people leaving on the state of the Russian economy, which, as I say, is not, which, as you say, is not a picture of health in the first place. But over to you.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for having me here. And I would start with completely disagreeing with Vladimir. Possibly from the point of view of demography, those he said 1%. Our calculations show that it's a little bit lower than that. We came to a figure at about 0.8% of the workforce. That it is not tragic. Well, it all depends on your definition of a tragedy, but it definitely doesn't make Russian economy better. Because one of the main problems of the Russian economy at the moment, well, effectively, it was the problem of the Russian economy even before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, but it became a very vivid one during the past 2 years is tightening labor market in Russia. In other words, Russia doesn't have enough people to fill all the job positions it created, partly with the help of the public money and the state budget. I was asked not to bore you with graphs and presentations, so to find this graph, you would need to subscribe to the bell and go into one of our pieces there where we discuss the state of the Russian economy. And you will see that the gap between the total workforce in Russia and the total number of people employed and the demand for workers it was basically narrowing for quite a while. Well, but in 2022, and especially in 2023, those two lines inverted. In other words, the demand for workforce was above the total number of the workforce. And that was driving inflation like there is no tomorrow. So just to recap, Russian inflation has probably peaked this month. And for the first time in almost 2 years, it became single digit. It is 9.8%, the latest reading. And one of the main sources of that, of this high inflation, which just to remind you, leads Russian central bank to keep the base rate at 21%. I repeat, 21%. If you complain about the cost of your mortgage, just imagine 21%. And the driving force behind that is inflation. The driving force behind the inflation is, I mean, one of the main of the driving forces behind the inflation is the lack of people. So this this can be explained by obviously several reasons. First of all, there is high demand coming from more money injected into the military and import substitution industry. Basically, military plants want more people. But on the supply side, we also see a problem because some people are taken to the front lines, seduced by higher payments. Some people have left the country. And also there is a huge drive by the local authorities to limit the emigration of workers from the Central Asia to keep the social peace in regions and to keep Russians who are nervous about non-Slavic faces on their streets to keep them at least calm, if not happy. So that means that part of that equation is Russia's brain drain. And if you come back to your school days and pick from your memory Adam Smith, who cited workforce as one of the three pillars of the wealth of any nation, you will suddenly realize that the number of the workforce, its ability to work and its desire to work is one of the driving forces behind nations' GDP. And by stimulating the brain drain, we as a not royal we, but rather editorial we actually help to solve the main problem of deterring Russia and of weakening Vladimir Putin's regime. Because at the end of the day, by taking people out of Russia, and as it has been said, educated people and people who are in their 20s, 30s, or even 40s. On the one hand, it deprives Russian economy of skillful workers. I'm not sure about journalists, but definitely physicists, mathematicians, bankers, engineers, IT specialists, doctors, and the likes. So you deprive the Russian economy of that, thus driving salaries up, thus keeping inflation high and all that. And on the other hand, you employ those people in the West, thus increasing the economic benefit for the countries. Well, here I would probably climb my soapbox and say that the policies of the eastern flank of the European Union goes completely against that. I understand that there are some security worries peddled by securitocrats in those countries. Partly it is driven by the populist policies and old good style nationalism, but we see in several countries on the eastern flank, and I would definitely want to outline Czech Republic, Finland, the Baltic states, and several other countries are following the suit of closing their doors for the Russians, citing security problems and the overall inherited genetic imperialism of the Russians. I'm not a specialist in genetic imperialism, but I can definitely tell you that closing the doors to make the security services work easier goes against my understanding of the public good. So by closing the doors for the Russians who are not pushed out of the country for the fear of their lives, but who simply want to make their life elsewhere because of aesthetical, political, or reasons or fear for the future of their kids, I think it's a completely counterproductive measure. I understand that the vast majority of those who want to leave Russia are driven by social and material conformity, and I do not see any problem with that. Because in my universe, the Soviet Union, onto its teeth in the 70s and early 80s, posed probably a bigger threat to the global security than Putin's Russia today, simply because it was bigger, more ambitious, more active, and on the same level of political madness. But even at that time, the Western countries were ready to welcome the Soviet citizens, or those people who wanted to rescind their Soviet citizenship, who were perfectly, most of them enjoyed this conformity. Most of them were conformists, not dissimilar to those who are in Russia today. And they moved to the United States, Israel, Western Germany, France, Australia, Canada. And even there, they still enjoyed the idea that Pushkin is the greatest writer of the universe, and the Russian salad is the pinnacle of the international cuisine. And but on the other hand, the Soviet military-industrial complex was deprived of those engineers, IT specialists, mathematicians, and the likes. And at the end of the day, Sergey Brin graduated in the United States and created Google, which you may dislike, but still, not in the Soviet Union creating Yandex. And I think that it's, from my point of view, it's a valid point to open the doors to the to those Russians who are ready to leave the country, and by doing that, making a dent in Putin's economy, and at some point We just need to decide what do we really want to achieve with the sanctions and visa regimes. Is our aim is to weaken Putin's regime, or is our way to punish Russians for their genetic imperialism and overall uncivilized behavior on this planet? I think that in my universe, the first aim is more important and probably easier to achieve. And that's why I would probably urge the governments of the countries of the eastern flank of Europe to be more proactive, and even in of the West European countries to be more proactive in attracting professional Russians, PhD students, and their families in order to weaken the Putin's economy and to deter Russia long term. Thank you very much. I'm climbing off my soapbox.
That's quite all right to be on a soapbox, Alexander. You, as I say, like Vladimir, will get interrogated for it anyway. And anyway, I appreciated both elements of your presentation, the economic effects and what you said about Western countries as well. I mean, for what it's worth, as somebody who is perhaps slightly more security-minded than you are, for example, then I have some sympathy with this on the basis that obviously some Russians leave to dodge the draft, which is reasonable, by the way. That's entirely fair. But in terms of what you just called, I think, as a genetic imperialism, then yeah, I have to say, bearing in mind what Russia is doing to Ukraine, then I do have some issues with those who are fleeing, who do believe that actually Russia does deserve bits or all of Ukraine, and that's just my view. And I think also, and I did notice on the issue of security, I did notice an investigation by the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, the OCCRP, the other day, which was talked about an organization called Prav Fond, which was helping, it claimed, compatriots abroad, which supporting spies and criminals and propagandists. And it was quite an interesting investigation, which they'd done. Perhaps my colleagues could put it into a chat for everybody's interest. But anyway, having said that, I don't disagree with an awful lot of what you said for what it is worth, which isn't much, Alexander, and thank you very much indeed for both soapboxy parts and for the economic parts. So, Elizaveta, turning to you. I don't know exactly the angles you're going to take, but maybe you're going to talk a little bit about, as I said at the beginning, the commercial implications, what this will do to Russian business, such as it is, what businesses we are talking about, whether we are helping the state in its war effort or just the normal running of the country, and maybe a little bit, as Alexander sort of touched upon, on Russia's potential for R&D in the natural sciences. Thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me here, and probably I need to explain a little bit in a little bit more detail why I'm here, because aside of my Bell activity, I do my YouTube channel, which used to be called Russians Are Okay, and it was created in 2017. With the idea to promote Russian-speaking entrepreneurs who achieved global success. Of course, after 2022, I had to change this name because it became too toxic. But I'm still doing the same job, and by now I've interviewed more than 100 scientists, entrepreneurs, IT specialists who achieved global success. When I'm talking about Russian speaking, they're not only Russians, but also Belarusians, Armenian, sometimes Ukrainian, rarely. But most of them, of course, they came from Russia. Another interesting thing about me, that I rarely delete my emails. And when I was preparing for this conversation, I discovered email from 2019, when I was invited to Atlantic Council to speak at the panel, but it was offline, that was focused on the issue of investigation, research, called Putin's Exodus. So it was focused exactly on the same topic, but caused by Putin's return to power in 2012. So it was focused on the most active, entrepreneurial, highly skilled, educated Russians who since that left in amount of about a million. And it was research made by Sergei Yerofeev that discovered and studied this group of people. So I would I would suggest to consider this process of exodus as not started in 2022, but started in 2012, when most of dreams and ideas for, I would say, normal Russia disappeared from people like which I just described. So, but if you look at real achievements of so-called entrepreneurial community of Russia between 2012 and when invasion of Ukraine began, despite this exodus, we still can find quite remarkable achievements. For example, which companies we know appeared at this time? For example, Telegram or InDrive or Xsola or Playrix or Wildberries, or quite impressive fintech. And even last but not least, quite developed Gosuslugi, the state service, online service, which appeared in Russia far before the COVID, when Western countries put more attention on digital services for their citizens. So why I'm highlighting all of this? I'm trying to show that despite of this fleet and exodus, the Russian entrepreneurial community is still quite alive, and it still finds some opportunities to create innovative companies. So the idea that today, after the next stage of this exodus, Russia will lose this opportunity, I would not put much on that. So I believe that Russia will still somehow, in a small scale, reproduce this ability, because math schools are still working, math and IT universities are still in place, and even more. There was a quite recent, let's say 6 months ago, discussion in the Russian government that I put attention on, preparing for this conversation. It was discussion between Putin and IT minister Maksut Shudayev, if I'm not wrong. They were discussing the deficit of IT specialists. It's quite interesting to play with these numbers and estimate the real size of demand and lack of specialists in this very important sphere, both for entrepreneurial sector but also for the war, because apparently Russia needs IT specialists not only for peaceful development of the economy. So Maksut Shadayev estimated, previously estimated deficit in about 500,000 to 700,000, and in this recent meeting with Putin in 2024, it was in December, he said that they reproduced 100,000 new specialists. That means that there is still a deficit in about of 500,000 of IT specialists in the country. So it's quite impressive because it's not just skilled workers, it's a very specific need. But then I decided to compare that number to something. And I Googled a little bit and I discovered that in the European Union, about 60% on average, it's data according to Eurostat, about 60% of the firms and executives, they say that they lack of IT specialists. So even giving this fleet and exodus, Russia is kind of on the same trend that Europe with the deficit of qualified IT specialists. And that might be certain advantage of artificial intelligence that can at least replace these people on a junior level. And Russia, of course, will benefit from that. What really, what sort of effect also this exodus can have on the Russian economy? There was a very interesting model which I researched doing my interviews. Interesting model of creating companies, successful companies on the global scale, created by Russians or Russian-speaking entrepreneurs. It's when your sales are on the global scale, but your development and IT production is in Russia or in Belarus. And there are a lot of really scalable companies, companies of a greater scale that used to work on this model. On public companies, we can mention EPAM. It's a Belarusian company. But many others that I mentioned, for example, Xolo or Plaix, they were working with development specialists, or also huge success of global economies, which is Revolut, worked with IT developers in Russia. For today, we need to understand that this model doesn't work at all and it doesn't exist anymore. So if we think about effect on the global economy, it's probably zero. If we look at Russian economy, it might be significant because it pushes innovations down. But then I was thinking about more global question. Will all these changes and brain drain put Russia in a different situation on the global competitive scene, especially in terms of IT? And objectively, if we look at the picture and we think which great innovations, which Alexander also mentioned, Russia created in the last 30 years, I would say mostly not many. So the major achievement was alternative search engine, which is Yandex, which of course is great. And but that was probably the only one, because Russia, with its amount of unicorns, is more or less equal to the same situation in Ukraine. It's a research done by outstanding professor Ilyas Tibulaev that works at Stanford. He is primarily focused is a research of unicorns and how they are produced. So Russia, I would say, it's a second-tier technological country. And today's major competition, of course, we can observe between the United States and China. And doesn't matter what happens on the Russian IT scene, it will not be able to jump into this competition on as a great power. And just two more remarks. First remark is that nevertheless, some of this exodus and brain drain influence we can observe in smaller countries, but not only ex-Soviet Union members. Recently, we produced a sort of documentary about Cyprus economy, and surprisingly, Russian brain drain significantly influenced Cyprus economy in a good way. Cyprus IT sector percent in GDP increased from 8% to 15% because they created such a friendly tax regime for IT companies and tech companies, and many Russian firms moved their offices to there. So, and now they have really strong community of Russian IT specialists, which may be estimated between 10 to 50,000 of people coming back and forth. And it's for such country as Cyprus, with population just about 1 million, it's really significant. And to finalize this brief observation, I would say that this brain drain mostly influenced not future of Russia, but future of Russia that we could have had if there would not be Putin's regime, the war, and many other dramatic events. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Elizaveta, and that's quite a profound statement to finish on, that it's changed the Russia, it's prevented us from having the Russia we would have had it not been for Putin and for a war. That must be true. But what I've taken from your presentation is that Russia is not perhaps becoming de-educated in the way that I claimed at the outset, but certainly to a certain extent de-technologized and de-competitivized as well, less competitive anyway. Okay, thank you to all four speakers for their presentation. I'm going to go straight into questions because we have only about half an hour left, not the hour that I foolishly claimed at the outset. I think I'll start with Richard Wright. He is a former EU ambassador to Moscow. A short question, maybe it's difficult to answer. Any evidence that the returnees to Russia have been requisitioned to serve in the army? Maybe that's for you, Vladimir, or you, Yekaterina. Yekaterina, you've demuted, so go for it, please, Yekaterina.
Thank you for such a provocative question. I would say that, like from my point of view, we don't see such a propaganda narrative regarding that story. It's definitely not what's being sold to returnees, because the reason for the reason which propaganda highlights in that case is more about like you could find better life in Moscow and St. Petersburg. The quality of life, the cost of living is lower, the quality of life is higher, digital services are working perfectly, banks are working perfectly, you're welcomed, you will be like your lifestyle would be better than in European capitals. And that's the opposite of going to the front line and joining the army. So I presume it's for the sake of propaganda, it's not a thing in a public I don't know, conversation or propaganda strategies. Yeah.
Understood. Vladimir, anything to add on that?
Well, generally, I should just add that now there are looks like enough recruits, well, according to the demographic situation and so on. So I don't think that there is any need to recruit returnees. So generally, I don't see any problems. At least the other migrants who generally get into Russian citizenships, well, they could be recruited. Yeah, for those who want to get the Russian citizenships and coming from some Central Asian countries, maybe there is a risk. But for the persons who already have Russian passports and just returning back from European capitals, I don't think that there is such a risk.
Okay, fair enough. Although maybe it depends upon how the war goes, but I take your point. That's reasonable. Can I switch to a different question? A couple of you have asked, do we know anything about the ethnic composition of people leaving Russia? And Alexander has already responded to this to a certain extent in the chat, or a Q&A rather. He mentions the high proportion of Jews, people who have recently discovered Jewish heritage, have returned to Israel due to its right of return law. Can you say anything else, please? Again, Alexander, Vladimir, Ekaterina, perhaps, on the ethnic composition of those who have left.
I can just add that those who had an opportunity by their ethnicity get the passport, they use this opportunity. So in this case, yeah, Jews, maybe some Germans and so on, not Spätaussiedlers, but Spätaussiedlers. Some persons who just postponed their status, lived in Russia, and now they use this opportunity. So, but maybe there were, I don't know, but it was just in case of the rumors, because there were some, when there was a migration to Mongolia, some persons from Tuvai and Buryatia who didn't want to be recruited, they migrated. But generally, I didn't have such academic evidence of it. It was just about the rumors. I cannot sign for it that there was any significant stuff. But one more time, yes, the questions about this. Those who could get the opportunity to receive the passport by their ethnicity, they use this opportunity. The question is if they stayed in this country when they received the passport.
Okay, Ekaterina.
Yeah, I would also like to add that, like according to the reports we have, there are some evidences on ethnic diversity of communities of Russians in exile. But I would say that the landscape of this ethnic landscape would reflect the situation in Russian big cities. So the proportion, ethnic proportion of that community would reflect the global trends of like ethnic proportions in proportion of Russian big cities. Even though there are several triggers, I would say, such as mobilization, which Vladimir mentioned, which triggered specifically some regions with the particular ethnic groups.
Okay. Right. I'll move on to a question from Anton Gumienski. I won't read the whole thing. It's quite long, but he does make a point, which to back up Elizaveta's, but we shouldn't assume that Russia will be deprived of its educated and creative and intellectual capacity. But he's basically asking, do you think that in the long run, this exodus of 1 million Russians or so will be lost in the other factors? There are so many factors, maybe Vladimir, but again, whoever wants to answer, Elizaveta perhaps. There are so many factors that contribute to the exodus, and the war is only one of them to the decline. Will the war get lost? I mean, it's hard to say, I'm sure, but will the war get lost in this because there's so many other factors at play here? Or do you think this is ultimately the main, will remain, as historians look back upon it, the main reason for it? Alexander looks like he wants to reply. It's great.
Yeah, if I may, no, definitely it would not be the main contributing factor. Whether it would be lost or not, I don't know. But it's like with a well-prepared borscht. You cannot say that one of the ingredients is the most important one. You just need everything there. And same applies to facilitating and encouraging brain drain from Russia. It definitely helps the overall aim of deterring Russia.
Elizaveta, please.
Well, I would look at historical data here. I don't have precise data, but if you look at Russia after first great immigration, I mean the greatest immigration after 1917, what kind of Russia we had? Finally, we had the Soviet Union with atomic bomb and the first man in space. What what it would be if most of the people stay in 1917, we don't know. So the same with 2012. We still have a Russia that launched a lot of successful companies or developed ability to fight with against Ukraine. Right? What would happen if all these people stay in Russia? Maybe they, well, I doubt that these people would be able to change political regime and block the invasion. I don't believe in that. And maybe those people left specifically because they understood that their influence became so tiny that they can't change anything. So if we imagine ourselves 10 years later from today, maybe the picture will be more or less the same.
Very interesting. Thank you. I'll go back to the war, if I may. I should have asked this after Richard Wright's question, but Mia Yankovic asks, has the brain drain had any impact, or is it likely to have an impact on the rapid and quickly deployed technological development we see on the battlefield in Ukraine, e.g. electronic warfare and drones? So does the exodus have any impact on tech on the battlefield, on the front line? Anybody? Tricky question, because I know you're not security studies experts, so if it's unfair, it's unfair. I'm very sorry, Mia. Maybe we won't go there. Okay. In that case, I'd like to ask one of my own in that case, and whilst I encourage others to pitch in, please. Elizaveta, maybe I could just push you on your last statement again on it's changed the future of Russia. That's how you ended your presentation. So what kind of Russia would we have seen had it not been for these factors, and particularly the war and the exodus? What do you mean by that is what I'm asking. If it changed the future of Russia, what kind of Russia should we be looking at? We're not.
You know this motto from Alexei Navalny, beautiful Russia of the future. I think we might have had this beautiful Russia of the future with all these people, and maybe we could imagine more democratic, more technologically savvy, more economically advanced, with transparent court system, more westernized Russia, if all these people stayed. Also, I attribute to the idea with which we started the bell. The initial idea of the bell was to focus on westernized, global-minded Russians. And you know what? 60% of our audience is now live abroad. Mm-hmm. So if you imagine Russia as a global-minded, westernized country, or we imagine, we certainly need all these people back to Russia, because they're certainly attached to this ideology, and one of the reasons why people are leaving, that's because they want to consider their life as a global citizens. Because let's imagine we have one of my interviewee on my channel, who's living, by the way, in London and doing the second startup. He went through exactly the same lifespan as my university mates, who initially joined like global fourth or global fifth auditing firms. Then he worked in a Western corporation. Then he decided to start on his own. But the whole idea of his life was that he wanted to work for the global, right? For Russian branch of the global company, or a global company that works with Russia, and so on and so forth. So for these people today, there is no space in Russia at all. It doesn't exist. I mean, there is no McKinsey, no Pricewaterhouse, and many other companies like that. So that's quite unique today.
Yeah, hard to be a Russian citizen and a global citizen at the same time. I understand the point these days. Yeah, Vladimir, you've got something to say on this.
I want to be a bit, if I may, optimistic. So, okay, let's assume that the current situation in Russia won't be so long as Soviet experiment, like 3 generations, and maybe not so long as Iranian, 1.5 generations, and maybe 2 generations, we don't know. But let's assume it will be shorter. So let's assume that all the persons who migrated will be still alive and active. So in this case, I suppose it could be quite a positive externalities of this exodus. Because in this case, it could be just, well, generally reestablishing the new networks and so on, and it will be much, much faster in this case. So I could be very optimistic in this case. So in this case, well, generally it could help to build the relationships, well, much faster when everything will be completed. But actually, we don't know what is finished. There's a point of completion. So in this case, this is just my mind experiment.
Excellent. Did you have something to add, Elizaveta, or was that a legacy hand?
That's a little of argument with this statement, because if I can, if I'm right on the current mood of so-called Russian elite or people close to it, for them, Western model is not fancy enough today. This is very different with what we had in the late 80s, when Western model was something so attractive and so desirable. There is no such feeling today inside the Russian society. Well, I haven't visited Russia since 3 years ago, but as much as I can judge by social media.
Understood. Right. I'm going to move on to what looks like a challenge to you, Vladimir, if I may. It's from Katarzyna Charilo. Apologies if I pronounce your name incorrectly. It's quite a complex question, but I'll read it out slowly. It was said that the outflow of people from Russia does not significantly affect its demographic situation. Okay. However, it is strongly influenced by the influx of labor migrants and the migration policy that was mentioned. Since 1992, over 12 million foreigners have been naturalized in Russia by granting citizenship in an effort to maintain a stable population level. A large share of them were Ukrainians, actually. Now, the inflow of immigrants is declining, which negatively affects the labor market demographic situation. How does Russia plan to address this demographic gap in the future? Vladimir.
Yeah, I just mentioned it that, well, generally the problem is, if you take a look at the migration, the problem was not just this current exodus, but the problem is that many immigrants were scared, because generally, of course, we cannot say that all the new citizens, Russian citizenship receivers were generally grabbed to army, no, nothing like this. But, well, it was quite well pronounced in the media. That's why many persons were scared. And also the situation after the terrorist attack in Crocus. So in this case, the result was quite a strange reaction. No, generally it's not strange, but it was predictable from the so-called Siloviki, but from the economic bloc it was shocked, because, well, generally so many obstacles, and if I'm not mistaken, -1 million of the labor migrants. It's a big problem. So in this case, I don't know generally what will be the solution. I know that some of the regions like Moscow region, St. Petersburg, are trying to well, somehow create some regional quotas still to attract the labor migrants and so on. Just try to be more flexible, to make this federal model more flexible. But still, generally, what we see right now is that the Russian attractiveness from the labor migrants is just going down, but also not going down dramatically, because take a look one more time on the situation. The migrants are generally from the global south. In the global south, people, well, generally the majority, they don't know anything about this conflict. Okay, do we know a lot about the civil war in Ethiopia, for example, or, well, generally the same, or the civil war in Myanmar and so on? Well, generally the same is for this global south. So generally some of them could be attracted. For the Central Asia, yes, they know a lot, but, well, for them also Russia is not for those labor migrants, until generally people until the people are not grabbed directly to the army, And until generally just the current contracts are stopped, and until the Russian currency is not fully devaluated, Russia is still an attractive market. Oh, yeah.
Okay, that
but-
is counterintuitive, Vladimir. I mean, it makes sense as you say it, but I mean, I understand that. Of course, people know the knowledge of the conflict is of the war rather is very reduced in the global south. I've been there and I understand, but I am still surprised that it is an attractive market. But of course, historically that has been true from Central Asia and even from Ukraine, as the speaker asks. So that's fair. Yeah, Alexander, you had something to say on this. Alexander?
Yes, I'll try to be very short. Well, first of all, yes, Russia is an attractive market for migrants, but we cannot be sure whether it will remain as such in the nearest future, because Russian economy is slowing down. Real incomes are going down, and there are ways to slow it down still. And we don't know whether the influx of migrants from Central Asia would increase nationalism in Russian regions. As for the question of how the Russian government is planning to resolve the demographic issue, or rather its effect on the labor market, I honestly want to drive your attention to the piece published by The Bell. So a piece was published this weekend, and it's about how the Russian government becomes more transactional in its dialogue with the society. And one of the main points there is how the Russian government is basically trying to pay for more kids to be born. Just please go have a look. You'll be quite surprised, I believe. But I suppose that this the program of paying for more kids failed in so many countries in the past that I very much doubt it would be successful in Russia. I think that the Russian government has no recipe for this problem. The problem will increase, and if you look at the World Bank population outlook, it shows that the Russian population will decline closer to 100 million by the end of the century. Let us live long enough and be able to check this outlook.
Okay, Vladimir.
I should just say that, well, if you're talking about the pain for kids born, it's something like that was organized many years ago. So I'd rather say that there was some other policy, and this policy was quite ineffective, actually. One more time, you see, I'm not going to say that, I don't know, some stupid persons did something. No, genuinely, it was quite a clever policy. It was just spreading the allowances for the kids until the age of 17. And it created quite a remarkable demand on the market for everything. And yeah, so genuinely, it's not for paying for kids, but it's just spreading money for the families with kids. And yeah, from the economic point of view, it created some additional demand. And I don't know, genuinely, was it the effect of the war, or was it just, I don't know, the overlapping of the programs that were announced, I don't know, that were discussed, because I remember they were widely discussed. But yeah, generally, the poverty of families with children now is much lower than it used to be before war and before COVID pandemics because of these measures. But it's not paying for kids, it's just generally paying extra money for the families. But is it going to solve the demographic situation? No, of course, no. But if we compare Russia with, in case of fertility, with the other developed countries, the fertility in Russia is not the lowest. It's quite high, quite decent. So the problem is mortality, and the problem is the attraction of the labor migrants. Yes, these are two problems, and I don't know how they will be solved.
And can I just ask you on that, Vladimir? The problem is mortality, and it's always, as far as I'm aware, in the past, it's always been effectively sort of congenital heart disease and sort of systemic failure, possibly induced by poor nutrition and overuse of alcohol. Is that still the case in terms of what's contributing to Russian men's premature deaths?
Poor nutrition, I don't know, but about alcohol and smoking, yes, it's still the problem. And as about the smoking, if I'm not mistaken, the smoking rate is going down. But as for alcohol, until the recent statistics, we saw the growing trend of drinking strong spirits and strong alcohol. Because looks like the trend was broken, but after COVID, it's a bit growing. But the recent data about the sales and production of the strong alcohol in 2025 gives us some opposite information, but we should wait. We should wait for it. So, but actually, after the pandemics, the life expectancy in Russia is slightly going down.
Right.
It was a pandemic and recovery, and it's still going down. We don't know. Is it because of the war casualties are coming into the statistics, or is it because of the growing alcohol consumption, or something else? We don't know genuinely. The statistics is now partly closed, so we can just speculate.
And what are the implications of the gap between male and female? It's 10 years, is it? Maybe a little bit more?
Something like this. Previously, within COVID, because of the quite high relative death rate of women, it was 9 something or even 8 something. I don't remember actually. But now, generally, after COVID, well, it came back. Of course, it's not such dramatical as it used to be, like 12 and so on, but still about 10, something like this. So generally, yeah, COVID generally made this gap lower, but then there was a recovery.
Interesting. And finally, just what's the latest on HIV? It used to be, the stat I used to hear was about 1 million of the population, and what's access to antiretrovirals?
The same. Actually, everything is the same with HIV. Well, not so dramatic as 7 years ago, because the Ministry of Health finally paid attention on it. I can say that in some of the Russian regions, well, it was the major reason for the major cause of death for the male population at the middle ages. Yeah, in some regions like Samara region, Irkutsk region, and so on, especially in Taliati, Shelechev, and so on. But yeah, well, now the situation is like preserved.
I see.
Preserved. Still quite high. Still quite.
Okay, I think that's very kind of you for letting me to take on my mini sort of demographical attempts at questioning you. Clara Le Gargasson asks, I've been trying to avoid the political questions because I know you're not all political and security people, but let me ask this one, see if anyone wants to take it on. Maybe Ekaterina can. How might the normalization of relations between Russia and the US, led by Trump and his administration, affect the exodus? Can you see it? I suppose, put another way, the question is there a potential America factor here if relations with the US get significantly better, which I don't think they will as it happens, but whatever. Yekaterina?
Yeah, I would say that nowadays, in a current situation, this American factor is the test for optimism and critical thinking for Russians in exile, because definitely there are talks. And I would say that, again, my today's point on Russian propaganda towards returnees, that's the very strong argument for them to say, like, everything is getting better. It's the best we can expect from this situation. So why should you like suffer abroad when everything is internationally is okay? So come back and live your best life. So I would say there are a few narratives to be developed in the coming future, but we are gonna depend on newsfeed.
Okay. Yeah, Catherine, I think I've got another one for you, but maybe actually all of you, and particularly Elizaveta as well. Madeline Daly, how well assimilated are people who leave Russia into the countries they've migrated to? She says, some countries are more hostile towards Russians, and she wonders if there's a connection or a relationship between the relationship between the host country and Russia itself. So if that has any effect on the how well integrated these Russians are into countries. Katerina, I know you spent a lot of time thinking about the integration of Russians into these host countries. Can you carry on for a second? Turn to Elizabeth.
I will just give the overview and pass to Elizaveta. I would say the main issue for Russians was and still are the visa regime and the chances to get the legal status or being naturalized and stuff like that. That was the first, I would say, challenge to deal with, and that's why the first wave of this immigration came to visa-free countries, visa-free for Russian citizens countries, such as post-Soviet, some of post-Soviet countries, Turkey in the beginning, Serbia, Argentina, for example. It's maybe not so expected destination, and so on. And that was a thing just to manage in short-term perspective. And then significant part of this community decided to move forward to European countries, to the US, and so on. So that was the main challenge. As for anti-Russian sentiment, I would say definitely it plays its role, but mostly for those who are planning their long-term future in for example, country which is not so open to Russian citizens. So after the visa issue, it will be the second factor, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, I can add a little bit.
Please, yeah.
That's interesting that most of the countries where Russians distributed themselves, most of these countries didn't expect any significant group of nations to come. Only very few countries are really are well adopted for accepting immigrants. And United States, with all limitations that come from today's news, United States still by far the most welcoming for immigrants in terms of structure of the society, because it's not only question of visas. For example, France, compared to United States, has very friendly tech visa and talent visas. What gives France very attractive for this particular group of Russians from my clientele, I would say. But in terms of integration, it's nearly impossible to integrate, because European countries, they have their own policy of how they accept immigrants. And about assimilation, we only can speak about second generation, but that will definitely assimilate in full. Also, I want to add that there shouldn't be any illusions. If people made something to extend their life for 3 years, they will definitely extend for 5 and more. But if people spend somewhere, invested in the country, because when you live in the country, you invest in language, in in the society, in the way how you live, in organization of your life, you certainly tend to stay here because you already invest so much. It's like with the company. If you invest in the company, it's very unlikely that you will sell it or just stop it if you spend already 5 years doing of this company. So that's the same thing. So most of the people will find their way. And for immigrants, is one of smart immigrants, Semyon Dukich from Boston, who created a venture fund called One Way, a venture fund which invests in immigrants mostly. He said visa issue is the least factor that immigrant and entrepreneur has to solve compared to other issues on his plate. So most of these people who already took this decision, I think they were more or less ready for difficulties. That's why most of them who stay by today, they likely to stay for longer.
Understood. Thank you very much indeed. Listen, we're pretty much at the hour, but can I just ask the panelists, just in closing, if you can understand, I said at the beginning that I was a little bit scared by this, and of course we're scared by what we don't understand. But equally, I was sort of optimistic, and a couple of you did answer this in the beginning, but maybe Yekaterina in particular and Elizaveta again, but anybody who wants to. I mean, do you feel that's fair? But there are reasons to be extremely worried by the Russian brain drain, but also reasons to be optimistic as to what potential it could bring in the longer term. Yekaterina, we'll go around again.
Yeah, I would say that there is definitely a reason to be practical from Western point of view, as I think, and to calculate the advantages and disadvantages in engaging with Russians in exile. Mm-hmm. And from my point of view, I would more agree with Alexander's words that it's worth trying to cooperate with this community while they are educated, Western-minded, and we haven't discussed, I know that we haven't discussed political dimension, but majority of those people share democratic values. So that might be a start of a good conversation.
Okay, that's good. Yes, we've discussed this much, Yekaterina, I know. Alexander, do you want to comment on that? Is it led into you? I'll come back to you, Vladimir. No, all good. Vladimir, you were more optimistic than I imagined, but that's okay.
What I should say, just looking from the general position. So this Russian exodus even for Europe, the majority of the European countries, well, it's not a significant wave of migration in most of the cases. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's quite well educated, but looks like that many of the persons who are just escaping from some quite, some troubles and so on, they're mainly educated in comparison with their compatriots, more educated, have more capital, social capital and human capital, have quite huge entrepreneurial activity. And you see, generally, the number of Russians in comparison with the majority of the countries taken not in consideration, small ones like Georgia, Armenia, Serbia, Montenegro, and so on, this is just quite insignificant effect. So in this case, maybe because we are Russians, we just see it a bit dramatical. But well, for the world, even for Europe, it's nothing so serious. Nothing so serious.
I understand. Yeah, that has been my main takeaway from your presentation today, Vladimir. Thank you. Elizaveta, any closing comments on this basis?
Yes, my comment is that if you look at the immigration policy of European countries in recent years, most of them tend to attract more educated, more tech-savvy, entrepreneurial people rather than less educated and less entrepreneurial. So I would say that this Russian immigration is very aligned with the goals of European countries. If they find a way how to stop banking discrimination and place of birth discrimination, because it's also related to banking issues. This immigration can bring a lot in favor of these countries, as I said with Cyprus, or for example, we now can review Israeli experience with the 90s, when Soviet immigration shaped the country as innovation hub, which partially created and invested in this, by efforts and talents in this innovation hub. So let's look at the optimistic side of the things.
Fair enough. Absolutely. As a security person, and I tend not to look on the optimistic side of things, but I do at least understand, and I have taken on board what you have all said, and I appreciate it very much. But most of all, I have to say, I appreciate Yekaterina for spending her year with us. She's coming towards the end of her fellowship with us. I'm hoping she can actually still write on the brain drain before she leaves, even within the next couple of weeks or so. If so, we'll send it out to you all. But I'd like to thank you all for listening, but especially the panel for offering up their expertise and insight into a situation that is perhaps not quite as drastic as I had imagined, but is nonetheless serious and well worth monitoring and observing over the coming months and years. Thank you to all of you. Apologies for going a little bit over time, and I bid you a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.